Greetings, finders of both paths and stars, and welcome back to Drift Lanes to Distant Worlds. So far, all the worlds we visited have been either artificial stations or completely unsuited for organic life. That's changing with today's subject, Castrovel. The second planet from the Sun, Castrovel occupies the same space as the real-world planet of Venus, and Venus was a huge inspiration for Castrovel. I don't mean like actual Venus with the acid rain and all the horrible corrosion. No, I mean the science fiction idea of Venus from before we actually went there and looked at the place. The planet's thick cloud cover gave rise to a whole bunch of speculative fiction that imagined the thick alien jungles that would reside beneath these clouds. A lot of times these jungles would be full of incredibly attractive alien women who, for totally normal cultural reasons, would walk around entirely naked, as one does. Castrovel is a broad homage to these old sci-fi stories, a vibrant world full of steamy jungles, alien predators, and, depending on your taste, a lot of hotties. That's not to say it's a ripoff, the planet has its own Pathfinder flavor for sure. What I mean is that Castrovel is drawing on a very broad science fantasy archetype that used to be quite common in pulp novel days, and building a unique location around that archetype. This type of world building is great in my opinion because it gives a chance to lean into the archetype for those that love it, as well as subvert it for people that would prefer to buck the trend. Everyone wins. And so without further preamble, let's get right into Castrovel as it is in Pathfinder's time with Distant Worlds of the Past, Castrovel the Green. Castrovel is perhaps the most welcoming planet in the system to the people of Golarion. The only difference between the two planets is a slightly higher than average temperature and a slightly shorter year. Otherwise, there's not much to worry about. In fact, Castrovel is so similar to Golarion that you could transplant an entire culture between one planet and the other without really noticing. You know, like elves, for example. Yep, the elves are from Castrovel. The continent of Sovereign is their fabled homeland, not another plane like some scholars perhaps theorized long ago, but an entire separate planet. Though to the elves living on this continent, it's basically an entirely separate realm, as the dangerous seas surrounding their home make contact with the other three continents difficult at even the best of times. As a result, the other two dominant cultures on Castrovel have very little contact with Golarion. The size of the elven population here has fluctuated greatly depending on the circumstances of any given age. During the Age of Legends, the elven population was split between Castrovel and Golarion, but the coming of Earthfall changed that significantly. Most of the elven population fled through the Sovereign Stone, the magical portal that links Castrovel and Golarion, and shut the door behind them, leaving the rest of the planet to fend for itself. The elves that did stay behind changed quite a bit culturally from their alien cousins, but the ones on Castrovel simply continued life as they always had, basically forgetting about Golarion. Tree Razor's coming changed that, and the elves returned to the planet through the Sovereign Stone to defend it and reclaim their place on Golarion. Relatively little of their population stayed behind, and those who did see themselves as the stewards of their ancient traditions, keeping the elven settlements on Castrovel safe the way the settlements on Golarion were during the original Exodus. And these stewards are necessary, because while they don't have Earthfall to worry about, Castrovel's jungle life grows quickly and is gigantic in size. The wilds already encroach these settlements at an incredible rate even when they're fully occupied. Without these stewards keeping the growth at bay, entire elven cities would be swallowed whole by the wilds in days. To be fair, they are pretty easy to lose the way the elves build them. Similar to the cities on Golarion, the ones built by Castrovelian elves are built to blend in with the natural world, incorporating the environment around them. This is most visible in the capital city of El, where a huge waterfall cascades into the natural valley the city is located in, feeding an intricate canal system that supplies water to all of the city. Flanking this waterfall are the Great Houses, gigantic noble dwellings that are big enough to be considered neighborhoods on other worlds. These houses, both the buildings and the lineages that inhabit them, are ancient and often used as proof that elves did originate on Castrovel, as their construction predates anything found on Golarion. El is the central city of Sovereign, and part of the reason for that is the Elfgate network. These function exactly like the ones on Golarion, except since the cities on Castrovel have been occupied continuously, they're in much better shape. The method to construct them is still lost, but their consistent use has kept them in much better repair. Similar to how they are in Kyonin, the smaller portal networks surround the Castrovelian side of the Sovereign Stone, which is guarded at all times to prevent unauthorized passage to and from the other world. There's very little traffic between the worlds these days, but that could change at any minute depending on how the war with Tree Razor is going. Interesting fact about the Sovereign Stone, by the way, it's not entirely unique. The elves modeled the Idar after it, but they didn't build the initial portal between worlds. We don't know who did, but they were actually pretty thorough with their work, because more portals exist between each world in the system. They aren't all in use, active, or even entirely known about, but they do exist. And later on we'll talk about another one here on Castrovel connecting it to a different world. Sovereign is the smallest continent on Castrovel and highly isolated due to the surrounding oceans being difficult to navigate. This also makes elves the smallest of the three major species on Castrovel in terms of population. We don't know which of the other two is the largest population, but if we're talking about controlled territory, then the Lashunta win hands down. The continent of Asana is home to the Lashuntas. Looking a little bit like humans and elves, the Lashunta have two features that make them distinct enough that you would never mistake them for either other ancestry. Firstly, they have a pair of antennae sticking out of their forehead. These antennae help amplify their innate psychic powers, making the entire species telepathic. The second thing about Lashunta is their extreme degree of sexual dimorphism. Male Lashunta are shorter and more muscular, while female Lashunta are taller, slimmer, and more inclined towards intellectual pursuits. Because of this quirk of their species, female Lashunta tend to occupy positions of leadership, while male Lashunta often act as soldiers. Many humans consider female Lashunta to be traditionally attractive, but that really depends on what floats your boat, in my opinion. I'm just saying, there's a lot of short kings out there. Lashunta society is very individualistic, and that extends to their city-states, which exist in a constant state of tension between each other. This never slips into full-on war, both because the Lashunta don't want to do something so drastic, and because an outside force we'll talk about later provides enough pressure to keep the Lashunta at least appearing unified to outsiders. The fact that these cities are often linked by portals modeled after the elf gates doesn't hurt either, keeping the lines of trade and communication open. Surrounding the cities are more dense jungle and hostile wilderness, similar to Sovereign, as well as nearly impassable mountain ranges. As such, a lot of trade relies on the elf gate network, and the biggest hub for that is Kabarat. The most prominent of the Lashunta city-states, Kabarat is the shining jewel of the Western Sea. Its coastal location makes it the perfect place for ocean trade, and its four Idara give it access to broader parts of the continent of Asana. The biggest draw for the city is its other portal, though. Just like how Sovereign has a portal linking it to and from Galarian, Kabarat's portal links the city of the Lashunta to the planet Akaton, the fourth planet from the sun. Akaton also has its own connections to Galarian, allowing someone who's in the know about this to move between all three planets pretty seamlessly. Kabarat's more hospitable environment and cosmopolitan amenities make it the ideal hub for these connections, and the city hosts many species other than Lashunta, including some from Galarian and Akaton. The continent of Asana is also home to a mysterious region called the Ocean of Mists, a series of canyons filled with a rainbow mist that acts largely like water instead of water vapor. The substance is too diffuse to swim in, but specially prepared ships can cross it just like water. It's actually less dangerous than a real sea because the mist is breathable and dense enough that anyone falling in will descend slowly enough that they can survive the trip to the bottom. After that, all they need to worry about is the long walk back out of the deep canyons. Some sailors even take advantage of this, descending from the floating platforms by long ropes to salvage anything lost in the depths of the misty ocean. Although, sometimes the crews of these ships return empty-handed, with only tales of frantic tugging followed by a slack line to accompany them. Whatever might be lurking deep in the mists isn't known, but if you want me to go down there, I'm gonna need a whole bridge crew and a set of shard plate at minimum. For all its great points, Asana does have one mark against it. The Lashunta are in a constant state of war with the final major species of Castrovel, the Formians. Resembling gigantic humanoid ants, the Formians have little in common with the Lashunta, other than the antenna and the telepathic powers. While the Lashunta are individualistic and sexually dimorphic, the Formians are extremely collectivist. The society very much resembles hive insects, with rigid roles and structures within the hive. The Formians don't really have gender differences, or much gender at all really, functioning more based on their caste and role in society. The exceptions are the queens, which exist at the top of said structure. The Formians live on the third continent of Castrovel, named the Colonies for its abundance of Formian colonies. Pretty obvious. In ages past, these colonies fought one another for dominance, competing to be the top queen of all hives. This resulted in the Formians keeping to themselves and controlling their population numbers with infighting. All of that changed with the Meeting of Queens, a historic agreement between the hives that would unify their species under a single banner. Not of any one queen, but under a kind of hypothetical pseudo-ruler. Formians are biologically disposed to follow the hierarchy they've set out for themselves. Trying to break from it causes them severe distress. This goes for all members of the hives, which is why the queens had to fight. There is exactly one space at the top with no room for equals. However, what if they weren't at the top? What if instead the top was occupied by a collectively agreed hypothetical being, an overqueen, to whom all the underqueens deferred as they ran their hives? This shift in thinking ended all conflict between the colonies, as the queens were now capable of collaborating with each other on equal footing, while at the same time maintaining their own absolute authority, since the Overqueen doesn't actually exist and can't order them to do anything. Having achieved peace, they decided to spread this peace to the rest of the planet. And that's why the Lashunta and the Formians have been at war for centuries. The Formians cannot conceive of a societal structure outside their own, and remain annoyed at the Lashunta for failing to fall into the natural order. The Lashunta, of course, point out that they are not bugs, and they don't want to follow the Formian Queen's orders and would like to keep running their own society. To which the Formians respond, "But you're so bad at it, though." War would have spread to Sovereign, except the same weather that keeps the elves isolated also keeps the Formians away, so elven involvement is limited to travelers that arrive on Asana. Castrovel does have a fourth continent, but very little is known about it during this era. The jungles here are dense, the predators vicious, and the rewards for venturing inside minimal. It doesn't even have a name in this age, so there's not much to look at here. Castrovel is actually quite similar to Galarian and offers a lot of familiar, but at the same time alien adventuring opportunities. The Lashunta and the Formians present totally new cultures to meet and interact with, while the elves provide a new twist on an old idea. It's also one of the easiest planets to access with the Sovereign Stone. It doesn't require any special survival magic or adjustment for gravity differences. In short, it's the perfect first stop for a space adventure because it's so similar to home. The Castrovel of the future, though, well, it's both very similar and very different from the world it once was. Driftlanes of the future, Castrovel, the Wild. Geographically, Castrovel is the same, 4 continents with the same name, still largely controlled by the same species that dominated them in the past. The 4th one has a name now, though, so that's nice. It's Ukalam, and it's home to a species of psychic sentient plants called Khazars, whom we touched a little bit on in the last video. Politically, the planet is very, very different. Let's start with the elves, who have changed a bit for the worse. The Gap devastated their civilization. Roughly half the elven population is estimated to have been on Galarian when it vanished, and that makes a huge impact for a species with such a low birth rate. Elven longevity also means that a lot of their populations still remember the ending of the Gap. Elves can live up to 700 years, and the Gap ended only 300 years ago. Other species have moved on, their people generations removed from the trauma. The elves still remember it. But what makes it worse is the things they can't remember, long-term decisions thrown into chaos by not knowing. Whole sections of their history completely blank, and to make it worse, while they can't remember the specifics, evidence suggests that the elves were betrayed by an ally at some point during the Gap. They don't know who and they don't know why, but they know that it happened, and that's made them a little paranoid. These factors ramped up Sovereign's natural isolation to xenophobic levels, and the elves have effectively retreated from the universal stage. The small number that leave the planet and live elsewhere are given the same title Galarian elves were when they dwelled among the shorter-lived ancestries, Forlorn. And while they wanted to keep other species away out of paranoia, Sovereign also knows that their drastically reduced population needs to be bolstered. For that reason, they instituted a policy called the Blood Right. That name sounds kinda sus, but all it really means is that any Ivaran, or any other species with provably elven heritage, is automatically considered a citizen of Sovereign, should they wish to claim it. This right also extends to gnomes, who are allowed on Sovereign due to an ancient treaty between the two groups. Ivarans, gnomes, and others who take advantage of the Blood Right are crucial to Sovereign's functioning, as the cultural trauma and resulting xenophobia makes it hard for many elves to interact with outsiders. Most consider it almost taboo to speak with an outsider at all, and have adopted a tradition called masking as a result. By wearing a mask while interacting with non-elves, the shame of this interaction is transferred to the mask instead. That is kinda messed up, and also proof that elves as a species probably just need, a lot of therapy. This isolation has very much hurt Sovereign in the modern day, and the continent is now a shadow of its former self. Many elven settlements have been lost to the aggressive plant life of Castrovel's jungles. The focus now is on the cities that remain accessible. El is still the capital, and its canals are still a beautiful sight to behold. Old buildings that predate the Gap are maintained alongside soaring skyscrapers and space docks, blending old and new. Access to the inner continent is heavily restricted, and El has several camouflage defense systems ready to fire on any target approaching from orbit. The Sovereign Stone was destroyed at some point during the Gap, and where it once stood is now memorial to all those lost during the missing time. The other major elven settlement is Cordona, the gateway to the rest of Sovereign. Anyone who is not elven attempting to access the continent is funneled to the city, which is a lovely metropolis that caters to all kinds of species visiting the planet. The only thing throwing off the vibe is the massive 50-foot wall that cuts off any access to the rest of the continent. Cordona is the largest settlement on Sovereign and has the largest population of non-elves. Funny enough, while elven society isn't very kind or tolerant of outsiders, it's eager to impress them with shows of extravagance and wealth. To that end, Cordona is one of the most beautiful examples of elven construction you'll ever find. You know it's good when native elves will often choose to vacation here for a chance to see the splendor. These visits increase during the time of year called Revel Night, a citywide masquerade that lets the elven people slip their inhibitions and cut loose. A lot of Ivaran have birthdays about 7 to 9 months after Revel Night, if you catch my drift there. Now, Talasia would be another major elven settlement, but something happened during the Gap to make things complicated. Pre-Gap, it was the site of a massive Elfgate network, allowing quick and easy travel across the continent and the planet. Sometime during the Gap, though, the elves lost control of the city. Now it's the domain of the High Transarch, who controls the network and the city around it. Just one man wouldn't be enough to hold the city by themselves, but the High Transarch isn't just one man. He's a dragon. A powerful one named Urvosk, protected by his physical might, powerful magic, and the most devious, underhanded trump card of them all, high-priced lawyers. Oh, also he's rigged the city to blow with nuclear charges if he's attacked. So the elves are, for the moment, content to leave him be, though they are very much not happy about all this. Urvosk can't help but be a little smug about it, which really does not help matters. The final elven settlement is Southwatch, and it's not a place you want to visit. Southwatch is a fortress city, manned year-round full of military trainees who drill and train until the onset of winter. During the cold season, the small sea gap between Sovereign and the southern ice cap freezes, creating a land bridge between the two. Every year, a species of predators called Aurovox attempt to surge across the gap, to attack and kill anyone in their way. Each year, the elves stand strong against them, blowing up the ice bridge when possible and gunning down Aurovox by the hundreds when they can't. No one quite knows why the Aurovox do this, beyond some basic predatory instinct. Attempts have been made to cull the creatures during other times of the year, but they burrow deep beneath the ice outside of the winter season, which makes finding and bombarding them nearly impossible. These attacks used to be a yearly occurrence, but the Aurovox have been quiet for the last few years, which could either be very good or very, very bad. The last settlement of note, though, isn't an elvish one, it's a gnomish one. Narrodel is a city built high in the mountain range called the Coronath Divide. Gnomes make up the majority of the population, and that makes things here a little chaotic. Adding to that, Narrodel is the home of a stable portal to the First World, meaning that the Fae can also congregate here to trade with mortals. The immense primal power the portal emits breathed life into the surroundings, making the mountaintop quite verdant as a result. Sovereign and its elves are kind of an anomaly on Castrovel, though, as things have changed drastically for Asana and for the colonies. Most recently, peace has finally been achieved between the two powers, thanks to the Shirin intermediaries that were able to bridge the gap between the two species. It's only been about 30 years since this happened, and any peace is fragile, but this one seems poised to last. The Shirin have actually shaped the colonies quite a bit over the past century. Though the Formians still believe their way of life is superior, the Shirin have helped convince them that other life forms do not need to submit to the Hive's authority. Instead, they are grouped into an outsider caste that can be dealt with on different terms, outside the Hive structure. This has allowed the Formians to step into a wider world and leverage their unique strengths to great effects. Each member of a hive is tailored to a specific task and obeys their orders to complete said task without question. That means cities full of ant worker drones ready to be bent towards the interests of industry. The same hive structure that makes them so efficient also shields them from outside influence and interference, as while the queens will treat with outsiders, they will not bow to them. And a rival corporation is just another hive in the end, one not under the protection of the Overqueen. The most successful Formian city is Queen's Rock, built on an artificial island of the same name at the cost of thousands of workers' lives. Its queen, Morgabard of the Thousand Spines, has made real progress in dealing with various organizations throughout the Pact worlds, bringing her city to prominence. She does this by being in multiple places at once, while never leaving her home. Her heralds, specialized Formians covered in elaborate branding, act as her hands, eyes, and ears on the outside. They speak with the queen's voice wherever they go, and this is not a figure of speech. Morgabard can possess any herald at any time, giving her direct access to whomever the herald is speaking to. This gives her great reach and is the reason she's one of the up-and-coming powers on Castrovel. Queen's Rock sits on the edge of the Gulf of Legions, a central sea that was once used to ferry vast army swarms between colonies to fight one another. Since the meeting of queens, it has instead served as a trade ground and neutral meeting place between the Formian hives. This advantageous position is quite good for the hive cities on the coast, and this is proven by their massive size compared to the other cities in the colonies. Protecting the Gulf is the Jaws of the Mother, a narrow strait that is the only access point to the Gulf from the open ocean. In ancient times, this was one of the most crucial fortified positions, and the old defensive structures still remain. They've been converted to deal with orbital threats now, though, since the bigger issue is people flying in rather than sailing. The Gulf does have a bit of a secret hiding in it, though, an old Lashunta watch post that likely should have been decommissioned after the peace treaty, but the Lashuntas are slow-rolling it because, well, you never know. The Formians don't seem to know about Watchpost Queen Eye, and until there's a compelling reason to tell them, the Lashunta are keeping quiet. The Watchpost is still manned and does occasionally undertake clandestine missions in the colonies, so its discovery could be the spark that reignites hostilities between the two continents. There is another settlement of non-Formians on the colonies, and it's a strange one. The Towers of Memory are 5 towers built with a strange geometry that seems to make the eyes slide right off of them, confounding anyone that tries to find an edge. Inside these towers live the Callborn, a strange extraplanar race that feed on memory and psychic resonance. Long ago, one of the queens of a colony approached them and made some kind of deal. The Callborn are left in their tower to do as they please. They will occasionally ask for memories from Formians, and their requests are always honored, even by queens. In exchange, the Hive can petition the Callborn for knowledge and wisdom. This isn't common, as the Callborn ask a price for their service, and that price can often seem oddly specific and dangerously personal, but it is very much worth the cost. Our final major settlement is the result of the Shirin working hard to connect to the Formian society. No culture, even an insectoid hive mind one, is actually a full hive mind. The Shirin themselves prove this, having broken from the swarm centuries ago. Formians who break from their societal role are rare and were previously just killed for being defective. The Shirin have convinced the hives to instead send these defects to Broken Minds, where Shirin therapists can help prepare these individualistically minded Formians for life outside of a hive. many hope to study what causes these Formians to rebel, and in doing so, better understand their own rebellion from the Swarm. Located between the colonies and Asana is Sea Crown. Officially, it's jointly held by both continents, but in practice, neither can claim much about Sea Crown. A collection of jagged mountain peaks believed to be formed by an ancient impact crater beneath the Shattered Sea, the Sea Crown has accessible beaches, but attempting to climb the peaks will bring a traveler to an impassable barrier, one that surrounds every one of the Sea Crown's islands. These force fields only partially obscure the interior, allowing outsiders to catch a glimpse of strange monastery cities inside. These cities are inhabited by blurs that look more like moving gaps in space, vaguely shaped like Lashunta. No holes have yet been found into any of these fields, outside of a solar eclipse. When that happens, a doorway opens in each force field, allowing outsiders access. No one who has gone in and attempted to make contact has ever returned. Occasionally, their gear is found outside, washed up on shore but otherwise unharmed. More strangely, it's sometimes found thousands of miles away instead, with no clue as to how it got there or why. But moving on to Asana, the Lashunta still organize themselves into city-states, each of which are part of a coalition that works towards the benefit of the entire continent while maintaining their own autonomy. Part of the reason for their staunch independence is that Castrovel's environment remains incredibly hostile. Megafauna roam the jungle, battling for dominance with the carnivorous plants that lurk among the more mundane flora. Even more dangerous are the unpredictable mold storms, which can sweep across the entire planet at a moment's notice. Even with all the technology and magical improvement post-Gap, these mold storms are still deadly to anyone caught unaware. You might think that the ability to hop into orbit would help alleviate this, but it's not that simple. Jungle overgrowth can appear startlingly quickly on Castrovel, and many cities are built to blend into the environment, rather than stand out. You can fly over a city dozens of times and never know it's there, and one bad predator rampage can turn a town into a ruin fast, quickly lost to the forest. Despite the dangers of Castrovel's environment, all three major species are dedicated to preserving as much of it as they can. Manufacturing with the potential to harm the environment is strictly regulated and often not on Castrovel at all. Most of it has been taken off-world to the moon, where it can't harm the planetary environment. And this protectiveness does bear fruit, with Asana serving as the main food supplier for the Pact Worlds, and many biologists and chemists finding revolutionary new uses for the abundant natural resources. Kabarat is still the largest of the Asana city-states, having transitioned from a traditional port to a spaceport with relative ease. One of the major players in planetary politics, its leaders are Lady Morana Kesh and her consort Grantius. One development in Lashunta society that's happened since the Gap has been the shift away from the rigid sexual dimorphism of the species. Their two possible forms are now separated from the sexes that once defined them, the more muscular being called Korasha and the more cerebral being called Damaya. Lashunta children are given the choice at puberty which form they'd like to develop into. Some even take a third option, becoming unbound Lashunta and developing characteristics of both forms mixed together. The future truly is fantastic. The leaders of Kabarat both embrace the more traditional gender roles, and they find themselves little at odds with the world around them. Their biggest concern stems from the outside groups taking advantage of the Lashunta city-states' individualistic attitudes to pit them against one another, with the end result being great for business and bad for Castrovel. They struggle to figure out how to fight this while staying true to the parts of their culture that are still worth embracing. This conflict can be seen in the city-state of Candaris, where the desire of technology and progress are currently clashing with ancient tradition. Built in and around Lake Nahan, every year during the spring, the lake slowly fills up, turning the upper part of the city into a series of islands. Eventually, the water level reaches the banks and spills over, creating dozens of spectacular waterfalls. Since this is extremely predictable, the crevices these waterfalls form are filled with hydroelectric turbines to take advantage of the deluge. Also in these crevices are sacred burial tombs tended to by one of the less populous species that live on Castrovel, the Kamos. They have long lived in harmony with the Lashunta here, maintaining seasonal temples and sacred burial grounds which are routinely flooded by the waterfalls each year. However, recently the Astral Extractions mining company discovered that when the water flows through the burial chambers, it creates a rare material called corpsicum. They are now doing everything they can to secure as much of this as possible, no matter what the Kamos have to say about the matter. They've bought out much of the local leadership to ensure their gigantic mining bots can crawl the cliffside in peace, and while the city government won't do much to stop them, the rebels calling themselves the Wallkeepers absolutely will. Another location experiencing change is the Bulwarks, a small chain of islands between Asana and the colonies. During the war, these were hotly contested between each side, and centuries of battle have left scars that can only now start to fade. Situated close to the island chain is the city of Cormina, built into the floating Shards mountain range. I set myself up to say literally in these videos a lot, don't I? Well, here it is again. The city is literally built into the mountains, using magical rituals lost in the Gap. The entire top of the mountain was sliced off and lifted up, the city built beneath the raised peaks. The city can actually slide down inside the mountain, Tokyo 3 style. A lot of cities were originally built the same way, but only Cormina remains today. There are theories that some of the other Mountain Heart cities might have just retreated into the mountains during the Gap and simply never emerged. At least 5 more are known to exist, and if they can be found, they represent a huge boon to Lashunta society. Doubly so if it turns out they're still inhabited and we've got a bunch of vault dwellers on our hands. Our last city of note is Jabask, located deep in the jungles and only accessible by air or Idara. A highly traditional city, the Lashunta here live with a sentient plant species called the Samara tree sages. The leader of the Samara, the Prophecy of the Wood, regularly dispenses knowledge and wisdom to the Lashunta living in Jabask, in exchange for protection. The Samara aren't very good at defending themselves from jungle predators, so the Lashunta do that instead. It's a constant battle between not just animals, but more frequent than average mold storms. Jabask is at a constant state of readiness, waiting for the next alarm to signal a mold storm or animal attack that you need to get ready for. The question of how sustainable this lifestyle is has been brought up more than once, but so far things have held together. Now the Ocean of the Mists remains about the same as it was in the past, except we now know of a merfolk species that lives in the mists called the Teshki, who are not too fond of scavengers descending into the depths of their home to salvage things. Sailing above the mist remains fairly safe though. The practice has likely declined since starships are just faster and less risky, but a strange marvel like the Ocean of Mist is bound to make up for it as a tourist attraction. But while Asana is relatively open to tourists, Ukulam is not. All three major species of Castrovel agree that preserving the fourth continent's natural beauty and species is incredibly important. The native Khazars that inhabit the jungle here agree, living their own lives to have as little impact on the environment around them as possible. Their society consists of tiny nomadic groups with a few dozen members at most, moving throughout the continent. Attempting to map Ukulam has proven difficult, even with satellite imagery. The foliage of the interior either grows too fast, or is supernaturally adjusting itself to ensure confusion and avoid detection. The biggest hotspot for this is Kaliria's Maze, which is a sacred site said to reside within the shifting canopy. No explorer has ever seen Kaliria, but Khazar groups sometimes invoke the name when fighting poachers or prospectors, implying that something with the name Kaliria exists to this day. The southern part of the continent is made up of the Ikal Expanse, a vast jungle with some of the greatest biodiversity in the entire system. Moving north, you hit the Singing Ranges, a mountain range formed when two ancient continents collided, creating Ukulam. The mountains are crisscrossed with holes from a burrowing mole species that lives there, and when the wind blows through them, a faint whistling sound can be heard. The same continental collision formed the tiered plateaus of the northern steppe. Close to the North Pole, the northern steppe is quite cold most of the year, and occupied by several herd animal species that are more at home here outside the dense jungles farther south. Prior to the peace accords, the Formians had a few settlements on Ukulam, largely for defensive purposes. After the war ended, one of these was converted into a conservation station for the Isawath Conservancy. The settlement, called the Isawath Nexus, is the major hub for official exploration and conservation efforts on Ukulam. Legitimate explorers interested in the continent will need to head here first to get proper permits and other such things taken care of before they can just walk into the jungle. If Flare and Danger is more your speed, Walakar's expedition offers jungle exploration that's guaranteed to knock your socks off. Led by the eponymous Walakar, the expeditions offered are legit, and Walakar is a capable survivalist. He just has a tendency to go for broke showing off for clients and has needed his business partner Zikbiz to rescue his teams on multiple occasions. Ukulam is not completely untouched, though. The Formian Fortress Station 9 originally developed biological defense measures to guard against similar attacks by the Lashuntas. During the gap, this base was abandoned following a successful strike, but those living defenses weren't all dead. In the time since, they've evolved further, making the place quite dangerous. The Isawath Conservancy is conflicted as to what to do. They consider the creatures here an invasive species and want them exterminated, but simply bombing the place to glass is a bad idea. Right now, these new species are contained in the location, but if you blow the place up, you scatter their biological matter all over the place, so careful consideration needs to be taken. But that's all kind of small potatoes compared to the more recent issues afflicting Ukulam. It began on Castrovel's moon, Elendray. I kind of undersold just how much pollution there is up there, as Castrovel outsourced pretty much any potentially polluting job up to the moon's barren surface. Following a recent cosmic shakeup that we will get to at the end of this whole series, something on the moon, woke up. It seemed to absorb all the pollution into itself, rolling across the moon and destroying several facilities. Then it did something horrifying. The strange pollution ooze launched itself at the planet, landing on Ukulam. Its corruption of the local wildlife has been swift, and working under it are thousands of what appear to be Formian corpses, animated by disgusting goop. The Formians of Broken Mind were the first to name it, claiming the terror had returned. Returned is a bad word to end that sentence on, I don't like that at all. There also might be two such objects working together. One crashed into the sea, while the other hit the Singing Mountains. Whatever is causing it, more distorted Formian-like monsters appear every day and spread more death and pollution to the previously unspoiled continent. All the while, the psychic children of Castrovel know the name, the Terror. What a cheerful note to end on. I'm sure glad Castrovel is safe and not gonna die. Castrovel is an interesting place in the Starfinder timeline. It's a lot more fantastic compared to other locations, more grounded in science. It has giant fungi, huge six-eyed dinosaurs, and psychic bugs just all over the place. During Pathfinder's time, the elves were an important ancestry on Golarion, but now that that planet is gone and the elves are withdrawn, the Lashunta have taken center stage. Which I like, it kinda keeps things interesting. The planet has a lot of seeds for conflict, both large and small, with a strong bent towards environmental themes. I think it asks an interesting question for a time when interplanetary travel is common. What is preservation like in this time? Nature changes and evolves, all who exist in it are also part of it. Does the impact of a civilization work against nature, or is it just a different expression of it? With the Terror, we see how even a good idea can go wrong if it's allowed to work in excess. Castrovel did the equivalent of sweeping things under the rug, and now black mold is really starting to show. So what did you all think of Castrovel? Exotic and fun, or kinda too close to stuff you've seen before? I will say it's the planet with the least gimmick out of all the Pact Worlds. It's very similar to Lost Golarion, and that can work against it, though it can also work for it as a way to ease players into the science fantasy adventures. It also has hot aliens, which is kind of at least worth 1 point, I think. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this look into another one of the Pact Worlds. We covered what's in Golarion's spot already, so next time we skip to planet number 4, Akaton. And oh boy, if you thought this planet was a pulp sci-fi reference, you ain't seen nothing. Thank you again for watching, Pathfinders and Starfinders. Check out the socials linked below, as well as the Patreon, do all those YouTube things, keep your eyes on those stars, and of course, explore, report, and cooperate.